Hi, David Thornburgh, back to you from the confines of Studio C70 here at the Committee of 70 on South Broad Street in Philadelphia. It's a beautiful sunny day. It's primary election day. It's a day to get out and vote and to encourage others in your family and friends and your networks to get out and vote as well. So all through the day, we've been talking to folks that are engaged in the political process, movers and shakers and troublemakers who are paying close attention to what happens here today and also trying to make things happen and change into the future. So joining me is Jim Lundberg. Jim is active with Independent Pennsylvanians. We'll talk more about that, but Jim is a political reformer who is, I think, asking urgently the question why people who are not registered in one of the main political parties are not eligible to vote on primaries day. So following from that, Jim, you live in Quakertown, right?
Yes, yes.
And today's election day.
Yes, it is, for some people.
For some people. Did you have anything to vote on in Quakertown?
Not a thing.
Not a thing.
Voted on how my wife could get to the polls, that was all.
So you've been active in this movement for about 5 years now, right?
Yes.
You're telling me. But tell me the circumstances by which you got involved in Independent Pennsylvanians. Tell us something about the group, okay. Its aims and impact.
Okay, Independent Pennsylvanians has been in existence for 15 years. It is not a political party, to start there, but it's an advocacy group for independent voters. It wants to monitor their rights, the right to vote, right to ballot access, and also to extend their influence. Politicians don't much care about independents because they basically win their elections in the primaries the way they're fixed now. So about 5 years ago, I had always been an independent in the sense that I voted for the person and not the party. But about 5 years ago, I really started to notice just how the grasp that the two parties have, not just on winning elections, but they run the whole process, and the effects on that and the partisanship and what it's doing to our democracy. So I wrote some letters to the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I got a couple in. And one of the members of Independent Pennsylvanians saw it. I put my email in there. She sent me an email. Why don't you come to our meeting? I came. I was greatly inspired by these people who are really passionate. I, the next year, went to the conference of independentvoting.org in New York, and I saw Jackie Salett, who's their president, gave a keynote address. And
who ran for president a few years back, didn't she?
She didn't run, but she was a campaign manager. Lola
right.
Falana ran,
yep.
but
That's
she
right.
was campaign manager for Michael Lundberg and others,
Mm-hmm.
and she's very much the heart and soul of the independent movement.
Yeah.
And since then, I've been out there. We write letters to the editor. We try to educate people. We go visit our legislators. We write them letters. We try and get in the media. I was lucky enough to be on CNN 2 months ago, and we just try and make our issues more visible.
So let's start oddly in sort of the counter, the opposite against independent voters voting primary. What to you is what was the idea? You know, primaries are a relatively recent phenomenon in American politics, maybe 100 years ago. And what's the logic of saying that only people registered in political parties should vote in those primary elections?
Well, prior to primaries, the elections were done, the candidates were appointed in smoke-filled rooms by the party, and primaries were viewed as a reform. And
it's about 100 years ago, basically, right?
I can't speak for them, but I think the reason that the Republicans and Democrats want to limit voters to their own party is they're afraid of the spoiler effect. That the other party would send people over and vote for their weakest candidate so they could lose.
They would try to game the system.
Try to game the system. And as a result, even though it was intended as a reform, I think we all know it's created more and more partisanship, more and more gridlock. I don't know if it seems to me there used to be Used to be there'd be an election, and then for a year, people in Washington and Harrisburg would actually work for us. Nowadays, they start campaigning the day after the election.
Yeah.
Right now, they're all focused on the presidential election of 2020, which is how many months away, and what else are they doing for us? So,
I think it's forever away.
so I think,
from now,
there's also a fairness issue that, first of all, as an independent, I'm disenfranchised as a voter. I feel locked out. As a citizen, I feel like our legislative people and our officials should be accountable to all of their constituents. They don't care what I think, because as a practical matter, most districts in Pennsylvania, most wards in the city are safe, and the Republican or Democrats are going to win it. So the election is basically the primary. Basically, there's no sense in me voting. And lastly, as a taxpayer, it's taxation without representation. I mean, that's what else could be more un-American than that?
Yeah.
And why? These are private organizations. Even if I were a staunch Democrat or Republican, I would say the state and the counties have huge problems with their budget, and these organizations have millions of dollars of campaign funds. If they want to have their own private primary, and they claim they can under the right of affiliation, why should the government pay for it? Why don't they pay for it?
There's a lot of kind of information and misinformation about who independent voters really are. Some folks say they're essentially like they're sort of soft partisans, that most independent voters really identify with one part or the other. So it's not independent as in independent.
Yes.
Although I think that the numbers are, and you probably know these, that somewhere around 43% of all Americans identify themselves as independents, right?
Yes.
But so what's your take on who, the characteristics and of independent
there's
voters?
some of that. There are some leaners. There are some people. They also say we're undecided. We can't decide which way to go.
Kind of
here or there or
wishy-washy.
the other. But there are only 9% of registered voters in Pennsylvania are actually registered as unaffiliated. But unless Pennsylvania is dramatically different than the rest of the country, 43% would identify as independent. That would be 3.5 million people in Pennsylvania. What did all the rest of them do? Well, some of them were leaners, but I would guarantee you that some millions of them registered as Democrat or Republican simply so they could vote in the primaries.
Yeah. So some folks say, and I'm partly playing devil's advocate here because and folks watching may know that Committee of 70 is committed to trying to open up primaries, but I just want to get the arguments on the table. Some folks say, well, what's so hard about it? Why don't you just go online, register with a political party, go vote in the primary, and then if you want to unregister from the political party, that's easy enough to do too. Yeah. So what's wrong with that argument?
Well, and I hear that a lot, but that misses the whole point. I mean, we're really playing their game. I'm an independent for a reason. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people say, well, maybe this, in fact, when I went on CNN, what they really want to know is which way we were leaning. It was right after the Mueller hearings, and they wanted to know, did that make you feel less or more inclined to vote for Donald Trump?
Right.
And we all said, we made up our minds about Donald Trump months ago. Yeah. I mean, quit trying to peg us. And I don't think, you look at the Republican plank and the Democratic platform, they haven't changed all that much in decades. The world's changed a lot. You look at some of the tough issues we face, energy crisis, environmental crisis, healthcare, globalization and mechanization taking away jobs. Does either party, do you think, has a real answer for that? So when I view as an independent, it's not about I want to swing back and forth. They've got this access of ideas. I think we need some new ideas and maybe cut across from a different plane. Mm-hmm. And we need some new thinkers. And if we could just get independent candidates, I always vote for a Republican or Democrat in the end, almost always. Yeah. But getting some new people involved would bring some new ideas. The old ideas, are they working?
Yeah.
They're not working.
Yeah.
So why don't I just pretend that I'm a Democrat or Republican for a month? Because that's how we got into this mess.
Well, someone said to me that that doing that, sort of temporarily becoming a Democrat or Republican is kind of like choosing a religion based on the upcoming holidays, right? So, if you're like, I like those Muslim holidays, I think I'll be a Muslim for a while. And then if you think, oh, those Jewish holidays are pretty. So I think it points out the absurdity of it.
Now, the bills in front of the Pennsylvania legislature right now, in the Senate and the House, that people who are not Democrats or Republicans at the time of voting at the polls could ask for. They wouldn't have to change parties and pretend who they weren't, but they could ask to vote in one or the other primaries. I suspect the reason it's limited to that and not completely open is, again, that the two parties are afraid the other party would try and come in and act as a spoiler.
Yeah. I think in New Jersey, I understand this, that that people who aren't registered as R's and D's can vote in the primary, but then once they vote, if you choose to vote in a Democratic primary, then you're automatically registered as a Democrat. So then you have to unregister as a Democrat.
I believe that's true.
Yeah, and you know that every state is different in terms of their complexities of their registration and voting and how they treat independent voters. So you've been formally involved in this this kind of ongoing campaign for 5 years, but it sounds like you've been interested in the larger cause for some time. You said you lived in Pennsylvania for 30 years. Yes. How do you see things changing? Is this a time when this issue is kind of catching some a head of steam and has some momentum? Or?
Well, sure. Whether these current bills pass in Pennsylvania, for example, this is the farthest we've ever gotten. Both houses do. It's supported by the past chairman of both parties, supported by the governor, supported by the president pro tem of the Senate and the leading Democrat. I don't know if it'll pass this year or not, but also when you look at the public, the percentage of independents people identify has been growing and growing. It's even higher than 40% amongst millennials. And a big percentage of that are also minorities who are increasingly, as the demographics change, I think you're going to see more and more people saying, this two-party monopoly just isn't working.
Yeah, yeah. It feels like, my editorial comment, like we're in a time when the base of a party, which is who comes out in primaries, is what's sort of driving the momentum. I mean, folks talk about Trump's base, but wherever you turn, you concentrate your energy and your time and focus on the 30 or 35% of people that you can count on, who will also come out, and which begs the question, you made this point earlier, what about the other 70%?
Right.
And then when you get elected, does that provide the political incentive to say, in fact, like, I do represent everybody, and my job is to, find sufficient common ground and compromise.
When they get elected, they feel like they have to fulfill the things that they promised their base.
Yeah, yeah. And then it also, this relative to turnout, and it looks like, so far, at least in Philadelphia, I don't know about the rest of the state, this is going to be a relatively average turnout, maybe. But, that same logic of sort of playing to your base, let's just say, doesn't do much to increase turnout. In fact, it may have the opposite effect. If you have fewer people, fewer committed diehards in your base, that's almost better, because you don't have to deal with those people on the fringes that might go one way or the other depending on the issue.
It's sad.
We're here in Philadelphia. There's surprising amount of support. We've done a bunch of campaign interviews with council candidates, our city commissioners. There's seems to me to be pretty broad support, at least stage one, for open primaries. But you're in Bucks County, suburbs. How do you see the the sort of geopolitical kind of makeup of the issue? Where is support strongest, weakest? Not sure.
Yeah, I don't see. I think it has more to do with generational type things. I think older people are kind of used to the system. They tend to be stronger supporters of one party or the other, and I think, I don't know that Republicans or Democrats more likely to support this. It kind of depends who's in power this week.
Yeah.
But I don't see any real pattern. I think more and more you're seeing a few people come out who I didn't expect to support it.
Yeah. Yeah, we were talking earlier about another set of issues, that the challenge on these kinds of things is that, in particular in Pennsylvania, where we don't have an initiative process,
Yes.
that we have to rely on, building support for people who were elected by a certain set of rules,
Yes.
and then asking them, once they've been elected by those certain set of rules, to change the rules.
It's exactly
Right?
right. It's exactly right.
So one hopes that, I think if by opening primaries to independent voters, that would, virtually guarantee, even in a low turnout election, in Philadelphia, maybe 20 or 30,000 new voters showing up on primary day. Statewide, it could be, if there are 700,000 or thereabouts unaffiliated voters. Is that the number?
786,000.
Give or take.
Give or take.
So even if you said, 10%, 20%, that might be 100,000, 150,000 voters statewide,
Yep.
right? And all of a sudden, I think this part of the logic is that the parties in their primaries would have to compete for those voters, right?
Indeed. And
Of course, nobody really wants to have to compete for new voters because it's easier to
Yes.
deal with the known.
And besides, even though 9% is a lot, if this bill could pass that are in the legislature now, currently the people that are discriminated against are the independent voters. And the only way you can vote in the primaries is to register as a D or an R.
Right.
Well, so a lot of people who probably are independents had to do that. But if this bill passed, all of a sudden they would say, I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to pretend.
Yeah.
And maybe they could stop dropping out of the. In fact, they'd
Yeah.
have more option if they were unaffiliated, because then they could vote in either primary.
Yeah.
And if the parties saw people dropping out by the tens of thousands, maybe they'd start paying attention to us.
That's a good point. I've always wondered in Philadelphia, which is such a heavy Democratic registration
Yes.
now, how many of those folks are registered Democrats simply because they want their voice to be heard on primary day?
Exactly. And you can't blame them.
Well, no, because I have been.
I've been beating my head against the wall for years.
I have been an independent voter and an unaffiliated voter, and it is kind of discouraging and unsettling to be a citizen on primary day and think, like, I don't have much to do here. I'm not part of the action.
That's right, unless you're doing what I'm doing today, and we're in
So what are you doing today?
Well, we are having educational demonstrations
Mm-hmm.
at 3 prominent media locations. We're going to hit Fox News and WHYY, and then the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a few signs like "Ask me why I can't vote today," and "Honk your horn if you like independence."
Have you done these things before?
We've done them several years. One year we dressed up one of the statues and said, "Ask me why I can't vote today," not because I'm dead, because
Right.
because I'm dead, or because I'm an
made
independent.
of stone.
But,
So are you going to be at polling places or just near the?
we're going to
the
try and
news
get some
outfits?
media coverage.
Yeah.
So we're going to.
So I'm just curious, passerby, people walking by, what's sort of the general person on the street reaction?
Most are pretty favorable. In fact, we like them to sign petitions for open primaries if they'd like, or at least get their views.
Uh-huh.
And more than half are very supportive, I think.
What's the all-important place for people to go to learn more information? Website
Yes, Independent Pennsylvanians has their own website.
and Facebook page,
Yes.
right? And there's also an openprimariespa.org website that we're part of, and there are about 6 or 8 different organizations around the Commonwealth now who have banded together,
Yes.
and we talk frequently.
Come a
with,
long way.
Yeah. Well, we're at an interesting point. I said after the 2016 election that one of the takeaways is whether from, the Trump voters or Sanders voters, there was a great there's a great deal of dissatisfaction with the state of politics and the state of government and the state of the status quo. And I think, can't cite chapter and verse, but I would think if you got people's responses about the political parties, there's a lot of dissatisfaction there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this sense that I like this line, that people are concerned that government is either broken or it's fixed, meaning it's been fixed. It has been fixed.
Yes.
So I think that's the vein in which you're operating. But
And I'm for independent voters, and you're for better business. But I think opening up our elections would be good for both. There's no question.
Well, Committee of 70 was founded 115 years ago, and one of our core beliefs is the value of political competition. And so it seems only fair that you open the elections up to everybody you can and allow politicians and people running for office to compete fair and square. But these sort of carve-outs that political parties represent, or that happens on primary day, just sort of seems to work against that spirit. So I think we're with you here. Anything else folks ought to know about independent Pennsylvanians?
That's basically it. We'd obviously looking for members. Join our website. We certainly have we have people contact list, email list. If you want to know what's going on, just check us out and support us. And the more the merrier. The more voices. The louder we make our voices, the more likely we're going to be heard.
Good. Well, I always remind people that this country was founded as a protest movement, right? Taxation without representation, right? We were tired of those English folks from across the pond, like dictating too much of what happens here. So it's a quintessential American value. Jim, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
And,
we appreciate it.
Good luck to you.
Thank you.
And once again, today is May 21st, it's primary election day. Even if you are registered as an independent, here in Philadelphia, you have 4 ballot questions to vote on. And if you're registered as a Republican or Democrat, you have plenty to keep you busy at the polls. So get out there and encourage everyone you can to get out there as well, and we'll see you along the trail.